there is an argument right now that the neocolonialism is actually possibly worse than the colonialism of the time of the modern period, because when you have the agents, the face of the agents of colonialism are now Africans, presidents, and so on and so forth. So we can get into that. But the real point I really want to make is that a way of exercising power that dominates, that plunders, that conquers, that dehumanizes the other is one way to think about colonialism as a way of exercising power.
It's basically equity. There's two things that a society needs to develop. I think it needs, there's lots of things it needs to develop, but two prominent things are education and equity. And equity is where you're not othering people and where you're actually looking at your people as a whole and saying how can, and needs that degree of focus, that degree of passion by which you can develop your country. That's the equity part. And then the education to get the young people to the point where they can use the internet, as you're talking about, where they are literate, even if, and especially if global literacy is in English, it's a foreign language to learn. That requires education. So you need to get to a certain stage. Otherwise, you just have a mass of young people who are not educated, who can't, they can't go anywhere. They can just do manual labor in the, as it was before they introduced the steam engine. That's what they sort of have to offer. But once you get to a point, then your question is, African young people, what should they be focusing on?
Now, as Ugandans, we must really revisit the impact of the imperialism from Buganda and the way in which Buganda imperialism dovetailed, colluded with British imperialism. And I think we can understand, for example, the psyche of the people of Busoga and the people of Bunyoro today if you don't understand the collusion between British imperialism and Buganda imperialism. Stories are told about Ethiopia. Ethiopia didn't experience Western imperialism the way in which the rest of sub-Saharan Africa did. But actually the imperialism by the kings, and I'm thinking about the King Amele, the Amhara, the creation of the Amhara tribe, and the creation of and later, of course, Emperor Haile Selassie and his predecessors. I mean, the imperialism, the ruthlessness with which Emperor Haile Selassie and those before him conquered, subdued, plundered other peoples of Ethiopia is an untold story. By the way, the other untold story of slave trade is the imperialism driven by commercial interests. The same thing by the Arabs. This is the Trans-Indian Ocean slave trade was even as devastating, if not more, because we don't know much about it.
It's basically equity. There's two things that a society needs to develop. I think it needs, there's lots of things it needs to develop, but two prominent things are education and equity. And equity is where you're not othering people and where you're actually looking at your people as a whole and saying how can, and needs that degree of focus, that degree of passion by which you can develop your country. That's the equity part. And then the education to get the young people to the point where they can use the internet, as you're talking about, where they are literate, even if, and especially if global literacy is in English, it's a foreign language to learn. That requires education. So you need to get to a certain stage. Otherwise, you just have a mass of young people who are not educated, who can't, they can't go anywhere. They can just do manual labor in the, as it was before they introduced the steam engine. That's what they sort of have to offer. But once you get to a point, then your question is, African young people, what should they be focusing on?
Welcome back to another episode of the Two Sages podcast. Thank you to everyone who is following our conversations, and we hope that these are yielding questions in your life and getting you to improve the way you look at things and how you live your life. Welcome back to another conversation. As usual, we start off with something a little light. So I think this time we shall do our usual tradition of something from since we last met to now, highlight from what you've experienced, and then we get into today's conversation.
It's difficult to find something light.
A highlight.
So
A highlight.
I think you're just creating. Okay, you meant a highlight.
A highlight. Okay.
But something light is.
A highlight. Okay.
Oh my goodness, things are too heavy. So I had a heavy, moment yesterday.
Did you?
No. My wife and I celebrating 42 years of marriage.
Wow! Congratulations.
Of course for Ian,
congratulations.
Young
So
man.
please
He's a young
don't
man.
allow him to comment on my 42 years of marriage. You've been married 52 years, I know, right? Because there's 10-year gap between us in terms of marriage. He was in a hurry, anyway.
I was a boy. I was a boy.
So that was great. Grateful. Yeah. But as always, it was a deep moment. It wasn't light. The other, last week, truly a highlight was the book authored by Professor Jimmy Spire Ssentongo, which I participated in its launch last week on Wednesday. And the title of the book is What Died When We Lived. And the audience was packed, the conversations were deep. And I found it, the book is worth reading. Everybody should read it who can read. It's a masterpiece. It's philosophy, it's art, it's satire.
What was he professor of?
He's professor of philosophy.
Where
At Makerere.
was he?
Yeah, he is.
He still is?
He still is, and professor of ethics at Nkozi University. Uganda Matters University in Nkozi. I think we've got to get it right. Yeah. So it was really good moment to reflect on he got deeper into what is in ways that just is remarkable. So anyway, that was great for me, and I definitely recommend the book to any and all. David, your generation need to read that book because it looks in deep ways, and older people need to read it because we were there as things were dying and we possibly did nothing about it, or we tried to pretend things were good, especially those of us who are comfortable, who have nice homes, nice houses, and so on, and comfortable. So yes, that was my two things.
I like that he wrote the book. I think the conversation we're having earlier, when you mentioned the aspect of us getting knowledge out of books, in my head, I was thinking about the future as like, how do we counter that problem? And I was thinking about maybe we need to get more older people to record their messages. This is part of it, but I also think what Spire did is very great, and what he does in the cartoons and all his work, I think, is really great because it's a form of recording. If you go on his timeline on Twitter, I think you can get, I think in the future that's what people will be studying as old the way we read books right now. People may be studying what their thoughts like. I think you too, you capture your thoughts on your timeline. I think that's a great thing. Just alluding to the conversation we were having earlier, maybe that's a train thought I'll keep in my head. It's food for thought. Over to you.
Spire is not a sage.
Yeah.
He's not in the category of older. He is, and therefore, he's not just the older who should write.
Yes, everyone, definitely. Yeah. Yes.
Oh, I don't know that. I was over in Zanzibar, and I have a small business over there, so that's my excuse for being there. Interestingly, the weather was quite cold, which was very unusual for this time of year. So more indications of climate change, I think. and I did quite a bit of reading. There was one book called Schindler's Secrets, the Schindler Cafe, the Lost Schindler Cafe. It's an interesting book. Brought me into the whole period of the First and Second World War, and the Jewish, how the whole thing. This is Austro-Hungarian Empire. Then these people lived in Innsbruck in Austria, around where Hitler came from, and you could just see the seeds of the anti-Semitism, which were, the racism really, which started, I suppose, around it was there in the 19th century into the 20th century, and then how the world, you just wonder, when you look at how the world stumbled into the First World War, it was just crazy, it just didn't need to happen, through that shooting of the nephew of the emperor. And, one thing led to another, and the whole deck of cards collapsed. That led to the anti-Semitism rose, that led to Hitler, that led to the genocide. Crazy stuff, and it was a family that sort of lived through that whole thing. So it was an interesting book, I think. And then I've read a whole lot about AI. I have two books. Well, one book on NVIDIA, and the other one I'm reading at the minute on the Empire of AI, which maybe we'll talk a bit about later. Yeah, so I've had time to read, and yeah, it's been interesting.
When I grow up, I want to be like you.
Well, I like people think of me as very active, which I am. I am active. I mean, I did a lot of exercise, running along the beach, walking along the beach, and that sort of thing. But I think your life has to be this mixture of stuff that you like to do, because I do a lot of business stuff, and then I think just broadening your mind in terms of reading. And
that's my point. When I grow up, I want to be running on the beach, then read a book, a glass of wine.
Yes, absolutely.
It's easier to read a book after running on the beach.
Please.
No.
He's my big brother, so I still have to look up to him.
I'm still his role model.
Oh, that's great. That's great. All right, awesome. Just think about when I explored something over the last 2 weeks, and that is modern stories and how they have kept fiction. In particular, there are books that I enjoyed when I was young, Harry Potter. So I was just thinking about, fiction defines, like, there's a whole world in the Harry Potter world, like there's a whole empire, I should say, a big business empire around Harry Potter. There are many stories, modern stories, that have become, have taken a world of their own. Unfortunately, I didn't find a particular one from Africa. Like, I don't know if you've had the Lord of the Rings. There is a Song of Ice and Fire. Like, these are stories that someone wrote, and they have become a whole other world inside our world. So I was exploring that and what enables that, and I searched old interviews of J.K. Rowling when she had just published the books, and I saw that what enabled J.K. Rowling to create Harry Potter, in a way, was the economic situation of the world she was living in. Without an industry of children's books, there is no Harry Potter, because she didn't have the money, but there was an industry of children's books that picked up her idea, and then these business guys made a whole business out of her first book, and then more businesses out of industry like that, and then the same thing with the Song of Ice and Fire. So I was just thinking about that, and how modern, because we know the old stories which changed the world, like Jesus' story, and how it came up. That's the only highlight that I had in the things I'm reading. But beyond that, it's the other usual things. AI, my work is in AI, and I was just thinking about how the people who are not actively in it, it seems like maybe it's not moving fast. But from my end, it is. I'm failing to keep up. It's moving so fast. It's a little scary. But I think that leads into today's conversation about.
Before you go there,
Yes.
so it's actually all related. Because essentially, when you speak about industry, empire, capitalism, there is a link.
Yeah, they're all
There's
intertwined. For sure.
absolutely a lot of link.
Yeah, for sure.
Stories that dominate, you know? So Harry Potter absolutely has changed. You know, it's had a huge impact across. So I stayed, I don't know whether I told you this, Ian, last year in Oxford. I stayed at the Oxford Fantasy Center. Yes. It's a center created to celebrate the work of Tolkien.
J.R. Tolkien.
It's amazing. And of course, fantasy. And I was very curious because this is quote unquote a Christian center, you know, because of, and I was like, wow. So back to the earlier conversation, David, so related. Fantasy is, we have a deep tradition in many African societies of fantasy. But you see, back to my missionary friend, Ian, when the missionaries came, they said fantasy was demonic. And now when I go to the UK, the Christians in the UK want me to celebrate their fantasy. When they called us that the African fantasy was demonic. Anyway, please.
Wasn't that is it J.S. Lewis?
Yeah. C.S. Lewis. But the real, what's argued is that Tolkien was really the founder, kind of, in terms of the modern period for England and for Oxford. I mean, you can come back to Oxford, but yeah.
But I think that you were saying that J.R. Tolkien, no, not what do you call it?
J.K. Rowling.
J.K. Rowling.
Yes.
Sorry, J.K. Rowling's, wouldn't have happened had there not been an industry there for children's books.
Yeah.
And so, this is, the opportunity was there, and she obviously had the talent, the two things. Yeah.
Yep.
And I think that what I'm seeing at the present time is that so much of the opportunity that exists in the world today is driven by industry. Whether we talk about the fourth industrial revolution, which is the AI revolution, that's being driven by vast amounts of money circulating around Silicon Valley, circulating around a few companies, a handful of companies, and they're driving the way that AI goes because there's a lot of money in it. And so the same way as she got onto doing books then. Yeah. So that is, what we were talking about earlier in terms of the colonialism is now not a national colonialism, it's a colonialism.
I think you're going ahead of yourself.
I probably am, but it's sort of just got me thinking.
It's all related.
Yeah.
So we are on.
Okay. All right. Welcome. Today's conversation is going to be about colonialism.
Okay.
When you're from Africa and you hear the word colonialism, most times it comes with a negative connotation. It seems like the gravest sin that happened to our ancestors, the gravest bad misfortune that happened to our ancestors. And when I was a young boy, I explored a little bit of why. I had this question, why? Why did it happen? But however, I found out that it is not a new phenomenon. It is something that has been happening even inside Africa, in Asia, and it is something that probably is going to go on in the future. So today's conversation, I want us to explore the conditions starting from the mindsets that enable these, or that enabled in the past and probably is enabling colonialism to happen in the present and also in the future. And I want us to have a discussion on what we think are the challenges that are there for the young people regarding colonialism that will happen to them now or in the future. And for purposes of keeping this straightforward, I just want us to maybe start with defining what colonialism is. And then we start off from there. Is that fine? From your standpoint, what is colonialism? Maybe what it was and what it will be in the future. Yeah. Oh, and what it is now. Maybe we should start there.
Quite difficult questions. I'm sure Zach's ready to launch into this.
I think, David, definition is possibly a difficult framing of trying to get at colonialism. I think I would rather we go to where you started. Not so much a definition, but a description, the experience of it, because I think that it's better characterized through the experience of it. I think that it's possible to speak about the essential tenets or DNA, because as you said, it's a factor of human existence, human history. So for me, I think that to be able to appreciate what colonialism is, and there are various words that are related to it. Colonialism, coloniality, and imperialism. And they are really related. If you relate colonialism with imperialism, it directly relates colonialism to the notion of empire. And empire is essentially polities, political configurations, political structuring that dominates, that conquers, dominates, subjugates, and therefore with that plunders, takes over. So that therefore means it's really an exercise of power that dominates. So the particular description of the nature of power within colonialism is the power that dominates, power that subjugates. And I think that's critical. Now, there are empires, but I think a more helpful way to think about it is empire as a category, as a way of exercising power that dominates, that subjugates. And therefore you can really speak about economic empire. You can definitely speak about empires, political empires, and there are many. And you're absolutely right, therefore, that if you think about colonialism from the perspective of power that dominates, that subjugates, that conquers, that plunders, that takes over, that one kind of human being dehumanizes the other kind of human being, ways in which the other is not regarded as equal, but to be subjugated. I think, yes, I think part of the challenge in terms of the experience of colonialism is where you started, to think that colonialism for Africans, the most devastating, and it is true, is Western imperialism, Western the colonialism that that dates from the 15th century. 15th century through there are five centuries of colonial conquest over an event. But coloniality is what remains, the exercise of that same power. The empires may have left physically. I mean, we could use, for example, apartheid as a form of colonialism, which is racist. So apartheid, the structures may have been broken, but actually the system, the DNA remains, the same thing with racism. So I think it's therefore good to speak about colonialism, the historical fact, when some empire takes off another, And I think it's also helpful, therefore, to speak about the neo-colonial, which is the whole idea of coloniality, the staying of that same exercise of power in different ways. There is an argument right now that the neocolonialism is actually possibly worse than the colonialism of the time of the modern period, because when you have the agents, the face of the agents of colonialism are now Africans, presidents, and so on and so forth. So we can get into that. But the real point I really want to make is that a way of exercising power that dominates, that plunders, that conquers, that dehumanizes the other, is one way to think about colonialism as a way of exercising power.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that the rise of the British colonialism, which I think is the one you're speaking of, that has most affected the world most recently, it was on the back of the various imperial forces like the Portuguese, the Spanish, the French, and so on, all jockeying for power back then, and I suppose it's the 14th, 15th century. I mean, I'm not a historian, but and then it was actually the rise of economic power of the bankers in the Netherlands, because what would happen is that some of the colonial powers, the Spanish or whatever, would just go and plunder their own people and tax them, and then raise an army, and then send that army out to fight somewhere or to go off and explore somewhere. And that model, actually, they were going bankrupt on that model. But then the bankers, which were Dutch, I think mainly, we began to get the sort of banking system and the loaning of money. And so when money was loaned to, I don't know, the seafarers who were plundering, or these guys, they would bring them back a return on their investment. So a lot of what happened in terms of the rise of the British Empire was based on an economic a rising, I wouldn't call it free market, but it was the rise of the bankers and the economists, the people who could finance these expeditions, and so interestingly, and I don't think that the British as such said, let's go and plunder and dehumanize people, but that's what they ended up doing. They ended up, and it was in the back of, we need cotton, and this slavery business makes a lot of economic sense. So, it was a very good trade they had. They brought slaves one way, brought raw materials another way, and so economic forces have driven what then became, you're like, how could the racism, all sorts of stuff that has gone on. And if you come to the 19th century, when Britain was at its height in terms of its industrial revolution, Manchester, Liverpool, all those big cities that were actually heavily in the cotton industry and textiles and stuff. And that was on the back of colonialism, because the cotton was being grown in other places, wasn't brought in. There was all sorts of trades going on. And they built up, they were an industrial powerhouse. And at the same time, Ireland was a rural agrarian economy. Now, Ireland was theoretically part of the British, well, it was supposed to have representation in Parliament, in the British Parliament then, supposedly.
The United Kingdom?
Yeah, it was part of the United Kingdom then, yeah. But in actual fact, it was, the British or the English, whoever, they despised the Irish because the Irish were Catholic. And they didn't trust the Irish, and there'd been various historical battles where they had subjugated the Irish, and but the Irish were growing very well on the back of an agrarian rural economy with the Irish potato. So at that stage, the English, and I say England as opposed to England, Scotland, Wales. England was about 8 to 10 million people then. This is 150 years ago, and that's what I've read anyway. And Ireland was about 6 to 8 million. Yeah. And because of the Irish potato famine, because of the way it was handled, because of the way the Irish were basically starved to death, Irish fell in numbers down to 3 million. Wow. The British over the years is now 60 million. And it was a combination of the disregard, and they, you know, some people had these theories about the Irish. Well, you know, this was a natural phenomenon. These people, they were breeding too fast, so it was, you know, if they were wiped out by a famine, those were natural forces. This whole sort of Darwinian, you know, the racist thing. And but the British economy was extremely strong then, and of course, then, you know, their numbers continue to increase on the back of industrialization. The industrialization itself depended on having the raw materials and so on come in from the various places on the colonies. So you have a very strong economic incentive for this kind of colonialism. And I think today, today everything's reversed. Britain's a pretty weak economy at the present time. Actually, Ireland's got quite a strong economy right now. And the strong economy, and even say it's America, it's these huge companies, you know, in the tech sector, which are $1 trillion, I think, 3 trillion, you know, I think it's NVIDIA's, is it the most valuable company in the world at the present time? But these other ones like OpenAI, Microsoft and all that. And it's these economic forces that would be driving, if you're talking about a modern day colonialism. So it's economic forces that tend to drive the inequalities and, you know, free markets. And so there's the winners and the losers on all that.
Great insights, I think, from what Ian describes of the experience between the English and the Irish. I find that insightful. I think two things that certainly emerge even from your earlier intro. The drivers, which was your part of your question, drivers. And I think, Ian, in the narrating a bit of that history, the economic, you know, the economy as a driver, huge, massive. I think I was actually interested, Ian, in what you said about the religious factor. You know, Ireland is Roman Catholic, and England is essentially Anglican Protestant, and there is a way in which England Protestant Anglican despises Roman Catholic. So I think the second factor, absolutely, is religion. And every empire, this in my research and work, I've actually established every empire needs a form of religion. I would even argue that capitalism needs a form of religion. Capitalism needs a kind of God to justify the way it plunders. Ian, what I would actually say to you is that in the very intent, in order to achieve economic dominance, in order to achieve religious dominance, you actually need to have as an objective dehumanization. As an objective. And in my reading, and I'll quote this, the beginning of the modern colonialism of European, and I wasn't actually only referencing British, it's the Spanish, the Portuguese. In fact, the modern period, the nature of colonial conquest that Britain and the British Empire and other empires exercise is something they learn from the Spanish and the Portuguese. And it's grounded in religion. And I will quote the Papal Bull that authorized the princes of Portugal and France to conquer the peoples of South America. So this is in the mid-16th century. But it actually begins, towards the end of the 15th century. The specific one I'm quoting is the Papal Bull, Duma Divasi, 1452. Let me just read it. This is the Pope authorizing King Alfonso V of Portugal as he enters South America. And the Pope, this is the Pope, authorizes the King of Portugal to invade, and I'm quoting, to invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all, and very interestingly, Saracens, Muslims. So the initial inspiration driver was to try and avoid the previous, the Muslim-Christian wars of the period. Subdue Muslims, they are called Saracens, I continue, and pagans. So pagans, and this is interesting. Whatsoever and other enemies of Christ, whosoever placed under the kingdoms, dukedoms, principalities, dominions, and all movable and immovable goods, whatsoever held or possessed by them, and reduce their persons to perpetual slavery, and to apply and appropriate to himself the king and his successors the kingdoms, dukedoms, and counties, principalities, and so on, possessions and goods, and to convert them to his and their use and profit.
That's quite a mandate.
Absolutely. And this is actually this is the DNA of Western imperialism. And that is why slave trade was part and parcel of colonial conquest. And surprisingly, and this is not something that historians have, because most of the written material that comes from the West is not quick to acknowledge this, that slave trade was itself authorized by religion, by the Catholic Church of the time. So the key things, economy, religion, but both are the exercise of power by these forces, economic forces, religious forces, is absolutely as objectives: conquer, convert, and so on. But it's grounded in the idea that the person you convert is less than. You must cause them to be like you. It's really a position of understanding the other as human. And therefore, if they are worthless, you can get rid of them, kill them, and do exactly whatever you want. Now, for me, the African experience, and I've been thinking a lot about this, is that until we Africans go beyond the European conquest and think about conquests prior to the European experience, we will actually not be able to understand the nature of colonialism. So, yes, absolutely, there were empires prior to the conquest by European empires, European imperialism. There was some imperialism within ethnic groups. Now as Ugandans, we must really revisit the impact of the imperialism from Buganda and the way in which Buganda imperialism dovetailed, colluded with British imperialism. And I think we can understand, for example, the psyche of the people of Busoga and the people of Bunyoro today if you don't understand the collusion between British imperialism and Buganda imperialism. Stories are told about Ethiopia. Ethiopia didn't experience Western imperialism the way in which the rest of sub-Saharan Africa did. But actually the imperialism by the kings, and I'm thinking about the King Amele, the Amhara, the creation of the Amhara tribe, and the creation of and later, of course, Emperor Haile Selassie and his predecessors. I mean, the imperialism, the ruthlessness with which Emperor Haile Selassie and those before him conquered, subdued, plundered other peoples of Ethiopia is an untold story. By the way, the other untold story of slave trade is the imperialism driven by commercial interests, the same thing. By the Arabs, this is the trans-Indian Ocean slave trade was even as devastating, if not more, because we don't know much about it, because it's not been written. It's back to the whole thing about written, you know. But it was as devastating. In fact, the Arab imperialism, which is enslaving, was prior to Western, you know, and it was completely predicated on trade. So this whole idea of conquer, subdue, plunder. Now, and I agree completely with you, Ian. The new way of plunder, of subduing, of subjugating, of despising, dehumanizing others is now taken on. It's AI. You know, initially it was this concept of globalization. And at that time when it emerged, many of us, both scholars and practitioners, simply said globalization is a fraud. It's a fallacy. Because essentially what it is, it's the extension of European Western ideals. Because if you ask globalization, and one of the things that were being said was that globalization, the evidence of which is the internet. But you check, what's the language of the internet? The basic language of the internet then, primarily the biggest, was English, and then other European languages. Today, of course, Chinese is taking over. So my final remark is this, that to be able to therefore succeed, it's critical to first colonize the mind. What is the idea of life that a people have? And therefore, one of the other drivers of colonialism is culture, is behavior, it's values. So we are now having this conversation in English. The fact that the hegemony of English is a factor of colonial
thank goodness it's in English, or I wouldn't be able to participate.
Yeah, I think there have been conversations around the benefits of conquest, and we would have to discuss the benefits worth. Couldn't there be other ways? Look, I have learned English, but this bloke, a friend of mine, he doesn't learn my language. You understand? So he's here celebrating. He's just here celebrating that we are using English. And you understand? This is so the colonization of the mind, the way we think, which is why religion is very much at the heart. Together with that is language. Language. So the Chinese are very intent. Do you know today? Universities have language, in their language departments, are actually teaching Chinese, you know, because again, AI, the power blockers are not just the West. China is big. I don't know whether we shall begin to learn some Indian languages. So I would add the third factor, therefore, culture. And culture in specific terms, because culture is about economy, is about religion, but I'm thinking especially about the whole question of language.
I mean, you mentioned globalization, and I think we've trawled through the history of colonialism and empire. So I think probably, you know, we're at a stage now to say, well, what does this mean to us going forward? What does it mean to us as people living in Africa, people with a heritage, you know, an African heritage? I've got my Irish heritage, but my experience in Africa, and I think you mentioned about a mindset. It probably is. There's a whole combination of factors, I think, that that leave Africa very disempowered in as things stand at the present time. But let me give you an example. Let me take us back to the globalization, okay, and a trade system that isn't, that, you know, the playing field is not bent toward Africa for sure. You know, it's bent toward buying commodities and then you know, doing your value addition in Switzerland, or, you know, like Swiss chocolate, but where does the cocoa come from? It comes from West Africa, that sort of stuff. And that
Swiss chocolate, I know.
That's been built a lot on empire and built a lot on colonialism, but at the same time, you've got Africans who bucked the trade. If you look at Dan Godi and what he's built and is building in Nigeria, not easy circumstances.
He's entering East Africa too.
Is he?
He's acquired a couple of companies in Kenya.
Oh, that's good.
Oh, he's taken over Java House. He's actually bought Java House.
He's bought Java House. Well, it needed shaking up, actually. But but I think mindset is there, because if I look at globalization, I'm on a forum where there's a lot of economists, you know, one of these chat groups, and I keep my mouth shut because they're economists and I'm a doctor. But my feeling about a lot of economics is you must take the opportunity that you have. You know, like a lot of stuff is an accident of birth. But if we look at what's happening in our economy in many African countries, a lot of it is we could be maximizing, doing a lot better than we're doing, perhaps because of a mindset, because of blaming historical factors. I don't know. But if I take, because I'm in coffee, I'll use that as an example. But to me, coffee trade, well, coffee doesn't grow in Ireland; it grows here. I can make a business that is actually on the back of WTO and coffee I can export at zero taxes into Europe or wherever. Now we say, well, what about value addition? You're not getting all that value addition. Yeah, then I can work on that as well. But we must take the opportunities that present themselves to us in the current situation that we're in. I'm speaking as a business person and entrepreneur, and move forward with it. Now, a lot of those opportunities are not there. We were speaking about the amount of money that comes in for research into Africa. It's tiny, and we were also saying that look, if you want to really, if you want to advance in fourth industrial revolution and AI in the digital world and so on, you probably need to go physically to where this is happening, whether it's Silicon Valley or in different pockets in the States or China or wherever. But I don't know about this mindset, which we say, okay, then I think the problem is our own politics that come into it again. Now we've discussed this before, but if our politics is not progressive, it's a dog-eat-dog world, and so you talk the previous colonial power, which is Britain. Britain is suffocating in debt at the present time. I think it's 220% of GDP. The cost of their borrowing is such that they can't move. If they give a wrong signal, the gilt market's cost of the interest goes up, and they're stuck. That Labour government is really stuck. We have not anything like 220%. We have got 49, 50%, somewhere like 50%. But our ability to repay,
I think we've passed the 50%.
It's around that, but our ability to repay is poor. Okay, but meantime, we're just spending money on stupid stuff. Just all the whole huge political establishment, all these money that will be spent on elections. I'm not saying we shouldn't have elections, but the whole thing is like, this is kind of democracy gone crazy. Because when you look at the amount of money that we're draining off into political establishment, and it's not allowing us to invest in the stuff that will really take us forward as a country. So, you talk about mindset. There's a lot of things going on here, but I don't think we're powerless. But I think we need to recognize now. I think it's techno-colonialism that we have, and we need to decide how we go forward.
So, thank you so much. I think I like where discussion is going. I like that you mentioned religion, economics, and sometimes colonialism being a business. Like people are in for business, and I want us to talk a little bit about the factors that enable it from the side of the people who are colonized. And where I'm bringing that out is, I know they are victims, or our ancestors were victims, but there are factors that enabled them to be victims. And where I'm bringing that out is because of a Ugandan author's book I read that I actually think I should put a poster in my wall. And he said that 100 years from now, you're going to be the ancestors that you are talking about, and reflect upon what enabled your ancestors to be colonized and see whether those tenets are still there to allow that colonialism to happen to you, so that your descendants 100 years from now will say, my ancestors were colonized. I don't know if that is that question is clear.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And I think to be able to get to that question is really the point of mindset. and Ian, you make the point about how then do we move forward, and I think your point about mindset is crucial. I think where I would possibly, I don't know that it's a disagreement, but it's a way to come to this mindset. I would say that mindsets of the oppressed are created. It's essentially the colonizer, the first way in which the colonizer gains domination and sustains it is by the colonizing of the mind, the mindset.
For sure.
The persuasion that I am less than you. Let me just illustrate it. Even as recent as today, if I do something really good, I keep time, I look good.
You mean like me?
Yeah, well, that's the point actually. That's where I'm going here. My own friends,
Yes.
African people, will say, Zach, you are like a muzungu these days. You are like a muzungu these days. Then when I do some things that are really crummy, less than, poor performance and so on, they say, now you've really come to your African roots. That's the success. That white is better, black is bad. This idea of now, the colonizer says, you are poor, you are bad. By the way, let me even reference it. Our president comes into power and he says, Africans are backward. Ugandans are backward. And then Ugandans begin to say, oh, we are backward. That's the success of the colonizer. Your language is, your gods are demons. Oh, we are demons. Our cultures are. And I think the first thing is to recognize what this empire, this colonialism, has done to us. And I'm not just speaking about European, by the way. I am speaking about some of the most colonized peoples of Uganda were not just by the British. It's the colonization. I mean, there has been, by the way, a whole conversation on the colonization by the Chwezi. The Chwezi were the first colonizers even before the British came. And there is a whole conversation between the contest for power by Luo empires and the Chwezi. And President Museveni is very sharp, and this is where he beats all of us. He's actually studied all that, and I think he invokes that knowledge to use it in order to keep us conquered and repressed. So I think to understand that, to understand that mindset, I think the second thing I would like to say...
Sorry, can I come in on that, Zach, actually, and then you can go on your point?
Yes.
I take your point absolutely about, you're in Mzungu time, you're in African time. We also have that in Ireland, you can be in Irish time, which means you'll be late as well. But at the same time, we need to sometimes distinguish between what's good practice and what's colonialism, and what's, the colonialists were very organized in terms of their administration and so on, and we have all the remnants of it in the civil service that we have here today. And they were very much sort of administrative civil service based, and obviously keeping time was that was important for them, and it is important because if you keep somebody waiting, you're robbing them of their time, obviously. But if you come from a society like Ireland, which was relationally based, or Uganda, which was relationally based, then there was a different parameter for time. My friend Gonza, my very good friend, I always say if I want to see Gonza, I'll make the appointment for first thing in the morning, because as he goes through the day, his appointments get later and later, because he gives himself, he's not so bound by time, and he gives himself to the relationships. So we should, I think, just because the colonialists brought, let me say, an emphasis on functionality or task or administration, does that make it bad? You see,
I think the issue really is to good practice, bad practice. I think that every culture, every society has good practices. Every culture, every society has bad practices. I think the problematic with colonial, the conqueror, is to name their practices as good and the practices of the conquered as bad, all of them. So even this whole concept of time, by the way, I think that there is something, the commoditization of time is one of the evils of capitalism. I would argue that, the commoditization of time. Time is money. I think that's evil. I think the Africans would say time is relationships, but I think that there are also weaknesses in the idea that time is relationships. So I think it's really, I think the real problematic with colonialism and conquest is the failure to appreciate the human in the other.
Oh yeah.
And therefore, if it were possible to have conversation and dialogue. So the first thing I was really saying is that, yes, the mindset, that mindset is huge. Yes, Ian, there is value in keeping chronos time, time by the minutes and the seconds, absolute value. But there is also much value in keeping relational time. It's called Kairos. It's called moments, and moments. So it's seasons. You and I agreed on this, that our life is not given chronologically, our life is given in seasons. And I would argue that the Africans were better in understanding the power of seasons as a marker of time than the European conquest. But you see the seasonal, the idea of moments as time, Kairos, opportunities. Opportunity is what Kairos is about. The Greek word Kairos it was lost, and so we bought into. So I think that the appreciation of the human in each other is what, unfortunately, colonialism makes sure it dies, because the one who conquers you are supposed to be more human than you. I think the second thing I was going to go into is therefore the appreciation that colonialism transcends actually color. So in a season, the white may colonize the black, but soon the black may gain certain economic power, religious power. It's very, very interesting how African Christianity is more powerful than European. And I can tell you, as that continues, have you noticed that in European cities, and I'm talking about London, I'm talking about Paris. The biggest church in Romania is an African-led church by a Nigerian. The fastest growing movements, Christian, are in North America, are immigrants. You can go even to the whole question of trade. And we've got to therefore understand, as we think moving forward, how do we see these forces? And there is a sense, Ian, it sounds simplistic, that part of the way forward is to create opportunities for understanding each other as humans and equality. A conversation like you and me, in which we acknowledge each other, business partnerships between North and South, business relationships, because we can't deny that Africa, for now, has the kind of natural resources that are going to power the future. I mean, that is known.
The question, of course, is on the sort of distribution of those resources.
Absolutely. And so you see the Europeans, what they want. Remember, what kind of agreements is President Trump making with Congo? That he can plunder the resources of Congo because he needs them to power the digital revolution that is upon us. So I think that this whole, in terms of moving forward, is how do we create spaces, platforms in which we recognize each other as equal humans and that we bring equal value to the table. I think that's the challenge. But I also want to agree that where Africa has been, and this is my argument, is that the current political leadership, and you made the point, the politics, how politics, and the politics about economy, politics about religion, the politics of Africa is one of our biggest downsides. And politics is really about leadership. My argument is that actually we have leaders on the continent who are worse than the colonizers, than the whites. They are doing in a more ruthless manner something that even the colonizers failed. So not only are they riding on a mindset, they have not done anything with the mindset, but they are in fact using that same interest to entrench their totalitarian approaches. Let me use an African proverb, a proverb from my own people, which says that the hyena of your home eats you nicely. Impyisi iwanyu ikurya ikurundarunda. The hyena of your village eats you nicely. Now, here it is. So the European Western imperialists were hyenas. They ate us ruthlessly. But this proverb says, your own hyena eats you nicely, but they eat you nonetheless. And my argument is this. These hyenas are even eating us in our own language. They're not eating us in English.
They're still hyenas, you see.
They're still hyenas. That's the point. So if we're going to move forward, we need to deal with our hyenas. You know? But we must deal with these hyenas. So I think that the problem of leadership is what the quagmire of politics that we are experiencing. So if we are, for example, to acknowledge resources that we have, which is going to be my last point, we've got to acknowledge we have resources. And part of those resources is intellectual resources. You see, he who shapes your ideas shapes your future. We must be able to bring to the table ideas that are philosophical, ideas that inform culture, religion, ideas that inform how business is to be done. So we really need ideas. The African ideas, Mufumbira ideas. We need to be able to quote more proverbs in the business room so that we are able to profile. Because to the extent that our ideas are regarded as second class, not worth attention, we will not be at the table. We will always be sitting below the table, eating the crumbs that fall from it. And we will be the conquered people. I mean, if you check, one last example, education. If you have a system of education, UPE, if you have a system of education in which the majority of Ugandans, by the way, have absolutely no capacity to engage with the internet. Studies were done about the completion rates in primary school system. Not only is it abject, but they did a study on competence, both numeracy and literacy, for primary 7 kids and compared them with primary 3 kids. It was actually established that the majority of the primary 7 kids in Uganda have a literacy and numeracy that is of the level of primary 3. If you have a situation in which 65% of Uganda's children are not completing, and we can do this for other African countries, if they are not completing primary 7, they absolutely will not be in the future that we are describing. So absolutely, they will be fodder for the coming new empire. The tech empires, they will be fodder, they will be eaten. The land will be taken. Right now, they are taking over our land. They will be the people producing. So I think to address the question of education is the whole question of addressing mindset, is the whole question of addressing the future.
Yeah, it's complicated because I totally agree, and I think in this sort of techno-colonialism that is upon us, Africa will be there for the resources and for the not the slave labor, but that kind of,
it's slave labor.
Whatever,
just name it. That's what it is.
And
we'll provide slave labor.
Yeah, but it is a mindset because look, I was on the radio this morning with I was on TV actually talking about the economy, and I was with someone from Private Sector Foundation, and the interviewer, the lady Mildred, was really sharp, and so I was talking about coffee and exports and so on. This young guy from the PSFU, he had some figures and he was talking as well. But what always strikes me when I get people from government agencies is the lack of passion. There's not a conviction in what they say. They say the right things, but there's no passion in it. And when I hear in Uganda, we do an awful lot of this in Uganda, because we say the right things, but there's nobody going to drive it. We say we need to spend more money on this, or we need to do this and that and the other. And, but the actual, from the words to the impact to the achievement is, we're pretty good if we achieve 10% or 15%, of the aspirations. Now, contrast that on Instagram, I listened to Paul Kagame, and Paul Kagame's a scary character, President Paul Kagame. But one thing he has, he's a very clear way of thinking, like he's an autocrat. And but that guy, when he talks, he was talking about people. He said, "Look, if you give us your money, we'll account for it. Okay, so if we have money for a program, and if it's for vaccination or whatever it is, you come and you check that the money is being used for what it's supposed to be used for. But don't give us money and then start criticizing and tell us how to use the money. That sort of stuff." We don't want your money, if it's going to be in line with our objectives. And, you can check around and you actually find that Rwanda is getting benefits through to the education system. It is actually doing stuff in terms of education, in terms of health, and so on. I mean, it's really punching above its weight in tourism, for example. Because there's a steely cold, I don't know if I'd call it passion, but focus that their leader has, and you better fall into line with that. And I think that, speaking of mindset, we say words. We've got so used to saying words here that, and in many African countries, but there's not the passion, it's not followed through, and of course then we just extinguish the talent and the resources that are there.
So Ian, where I would go, and I completely agree with you, I think I want to just go back to your we. I don't know whether you are afraid of saying
what?
Our leaders, not we. The masses are there to be led, but the leaders are the ones speaking and can't implement. If leadership does not implement,
but so it's become why I say we in the broad sense is because it's just they're endemic through the whole. Whether you're talking about an LC5 or an MP or it's just
precisely
there.
That's
cultural.
what the top leadership has created. I was a bishop.
But we are responsible then. We. Us in this room.
Yeah, but you see, when you spoke about President Kagame, you didn't speak about Rwandans. You spoke about President Kagame. I honestly think that even the way you speak, you exonerate people who are entrusted.
I'm not exonerating. I'm saying, and I don't want to go there in terms of the politics of it, obviously. But I'm saying
I think we should go there.
This is what. Yeah, no, but this is what is there. Look, I think even in the face of that.
Yes.
You can still do stuff. I mean, David, you break in the mold, in the sense you've got to, you understand something about where the fourth industrial revolution is, where you are as a young man, as a doctor, and you're like, I need to explore this, I need to do something. And I don't think you'll be in Uganda for many years. I'll be very surprised because you'll need to take yourself.
No, we want David to stay in Uganda and be an agent of transformation. And if this thing remains for you, David, alone, of course it will die. You leave Uganda.
Yes, and that's the point. That's the point. The problem is when the tide is going in a certain way and you're the fish swimming against the tide. It's hard. It's hard. It's and in some ways maybe easier for me. Maybe because of my background.
Because you're a Mzungu.
That's the first thing people said to me when I landed. They said, bye Mzungu. Bye Mzungu.
Exactly. If I enter a restaurant, the Mzungu gets attention and I don't. My friend, I have to always tell the restaurant
when I
people.
enter a restaurant, it's him that gets all the attention.
And when the service starts to come.
But I think you can.
But your mindset is true.
In your own individual thing, it is possible. You can break the mold and you can say, I am going to be focused and I am going to do something that matters. And we need more people in Uganda who have that sort of passion. Okay? But then we also need the people who will say, I will go to where the center of excellence is and I will come back, I will influence and stuff like that. Unfortunately, a lot of Ugandans have gone and they're like, look, my life is comfortable in America, in Britain, and something like that. I'm not, I don't need to go back.
This is awesome. We're going to close up, but I want us to close up on the point of the future. But before we close up, I want to comment on the mindset and the thing that you allude to of people going where the future is. I think most of the money I made while I was in university and earlier, I invested it in traveling to places that I thought people who are creating the future are. And that is after reading, or it was a result of me deciding to invest in changing my mindset. Because you mentioned that the problem is mindset. So I read that and I was like, oh my God, okay, I have this, how do we change? Up to now, I'm still on the journey, I should say. But I want to bring out that historically, people have always been investing in going to where the future is and then coming back. It goes back to when the Egyptians were at the helm, people were traveling to Egypt to learn about how the trends. When it was the Greeks, same. Even when British was at the helm, if you take, I think if you did a study, people in your generation, you'll find that at some point, most people visited Britain at some point. And the US now is where the future is. So people, I think, go there. I think the Chinese have taken their people to study there and go back. Anyways, I want us to close this in regards to the future. I mentioned something about the changing world order when we were starting, that on top of colonialism, there is dominance, in that there have been peoples who have been dominant at different points in time. At some point, it was the Dutch, and then at some point, it was the British, and now we see the Americans. Back then, at older times, maybe there's a point where it was the Egyptians, the Persians, and then we are seeing the Chinese. And something common about the way it's like a cyclic thing. It's like they rise, they reach a peak, and then they fall. And it has been like that for a while. And something unique about each of the people who rise and fall during their rise is that they have the dominant technology. In a way, they are creating the future. You mentioned the future. They're creating the future. They're investing their time, their money into creating the future. And when they create that future, it becomes the thing that drives humanity ahead. If it were forms of agriculture that now people are able to produce more food, or the Industrial Revolution that people are able to move better and manufacture more and create more value, and hence dominate. And now we saw the technology era that the internet brought, and computers and mobile phones, that the people who are at the head of that ended up dominating. And to reference what Zach said is that at each point that everyone dominates, their currency dominates, their religion dominates, their language dominates, their ways of life dominate. Now, bringing that down to the people in their 20s, in their 30s, about the future, it's that we are at the point where there is that change. It's happening. We are seeing that change happening. I want you to share what you think about this and what young people should be looking out for, or parents or older people, what they should be looking out for in terms of the changing world order, because it's happening in real time right now. So I wanted us to have that discussion in terms of the future. How do we avoid the neocolonialism he talked about? Or how do we create the future? He talked about bringing ideas on the table. And in addition to that, how do we build industry around this future? Because we've seen that without industry, the people who have the dominant industries take over. Yeah, I
think let me start at the base of the foundation, which we've been alluding to it as well. It's basically equity. There's two things that a society needs to develop. I think it needs, there's lots of things it needs to develop, but two prominent things are education and equity. And equity is where you're not othering people and where you're actually looking at your people as a whole and saying how can, and needs that degree of focus, that degree of passion by which you can develop your country. That's the equity part. And then the education to get the young people to the point where they can use the internet, as you're talking about, where they are literate, even if, and especially if global literacy is in English, it's a foreign language to learn. That requires education. So you need to get to a certain stage. Otherwise, you just have a mass of young people who are not educated, who can't, they can't go anywhere. They can just do manual labor in the, as it was before they introduced the steam engine. That's what they sort of have to offer. But once you get to a point, then your question is, African young people, what should they be focusing on? It's a big question, but I don't know. I think I'll have to think about that.
No, absolutely. And I think where you stopped, Ian, is where I was going to go.
Oh, good.
And simply say, the baton is in your hands. It's not with us. There is something that you must do that we didn't do, that my generation didn't do. My generation condemned our countries, our societies, to entrenching coloniality, where the dominance, conquest, plunder remained the order of the day. We didn't because we bought into mindset. We were not as conscious about mindset change. On the contrary, we thought it was the cool thing to put on a necktie. It was the cool thing to look like a mzungu,
Are you describing Ian?
No, please, he's my brother. So, but yes, look at him. No, I'm putting on a shirt, and so on. So all I'm simply saying is that the generation, what is now characterized as Generation Z, really need to be able to be acting differently. There are certain things that the Generation Z must reject. For example, Uganda. The Generation Z must reject Boda Boda economy. You must reject it. You must not accept that manufacturing more Boda Bodas is the future of Uganda. Yeah, so we've got to, and that needs to be communicated very clearly, not by me, but by your generation. We mustn't submit ourselves to cultures, economies that don't have a future. Boda Boda economy has absolutely no future. None. So we've got to be able to renounce those things that absolutely have no future. That's what you must do. But secondly, you must begin to be innovative yourselves. And it's great that you are at a university, David. Be bold in that university. Be centered in that university. Reject ways in which you are on the periphery. Being governed by, I'm the chairman of that university council. No, you must be able to make your voice heard. Your voice needs to be at the table of decision making in that university. That is to say, Generation Z, you must insist your voice is on the table of decision making. And thirdly, therefore, not only that voice, action. And I have joy to talk about Abigail. Abigail, my daughter, she's the head of Design Without Borders. She really gives me hope. Why? Because Abigail has now a program, Design Without Borders. Design Without Borders has a program to enable kids who are, I think they brought together kids who were 4 to 10 into a design space. And they asked them to design, to first of all identify a problem and then design a solution. It was fascinating what those kids did. So the reform of our education system belongs to you, because we must reject this rot. It has no future. So I think that there needs to be ways of acting differently, your generation, and force our generation and the people who are seeking to take political power are people in their late 40s and early 50s and 60s. I think you need to be able to be at the table of the decision making, because those guys in their 40s and 50s are actually, unfortunately, not thinking about the future. They're thinking about how to capture today. But today does not exist if there is no future tomorrow. And I really would plead that universities need to be the center of this kind of debate conversation. Universities must be centers of innovation. That innovation is not only technology. You are spot on. The future belongs to those who determine the technology of tomorrow, not, So I really think that that's the direction that the younger generation, and I think we older people need to be able to give way more intentionally. Give way to the younger generation to determine their future.
Right. Thanks.
I was just going to say that I read something recently whereby, in the first half of your career, until you reach your 40s, 50s, you should be the one who's leading and innovating all these things.
Absolutely.
Now, when you reach to the stage where we're at, then we become the people who should be mentoring.
Yes.
Okay, there's that. We have a lot of that knowledge and we can mentor. But I just think that we've lost sight of the priorities to build a society. Yeah. Let me give the example of Kennedy, this guy Kennedy, Trump made him health secretary or something, and he's actively trying to stamp out vaccinations in America. And people are now going back to, measles epidemics, because if you don't have herd immunity, then even those vaccinated are affected.
The Kennedy, that's the health secretary.
Yeah. What's his name? I don't know. But he's literally some guy from the Middle Ages, and he just.
Kennedy Jr.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
He's the one.
It's really terrible what he's doing. He's taking back scientific progress, and he's the health indicators he's making them worse. But if we don't, when we look at this society, society's built in layers, obviously. You have to say, so what do we do so that we have an equitable society?
Yes.
Then we need healthcare, we need education, we need opportunities, and all that sort of stuff. Yes. And that's where it comes to. This requires focus. It doesn't require us talking about it and then put the money into a political, sort of politics. Really. It requires us to say what will it take to do this, So, and that kind of analysis, top to bottom, it's there. The brains. What is frustrating? The brains are there in Uganda. People can do it, but they just talk about it.
Yeah,
they don't actually do it.
I mean, that's.
Probably, I think that's where our next conversation will start from. Doing it, because. Like we have mentioned the thing about industry, and industries are created by people investing their time and money. Yeah. And if we look at where Ugandans are investing their time and money, I don't know about you, but actually that would be the question. Are you seeing people investing in the future from the Ugandan standpoint? Because investing in the future is a big bet. Yeah. It's a very big bet.
David, you survey Kampala.
Another conversation.
You survey Kampala. People who have money, they are investing in apartments. They are investing in malls and what are those other things? Malls.
Property development, essentially. It's not a very good investment.
No. But it's the point you're making. Where is the investment in industry? Where is the investment in knowledge? People. By the way, I'll tell you something else. People are investing in universities. But today's universities in Uganda, the majority of the new universities are simply glorified secondary schools. And it shocks me that people think that if you start a university, you'll make money. Look at it's tragic. So yes, let's have that conversation moving forward.
All right. Thank you so much. We hope you enjoyed this conversation, and we hope that, as usual, it got you to ask more questions about the future, about the role of colonialism in the past, and how you, as a future ancestor, 100 years from now, can position yourself better so that your descendants, our descendants, talk about us differently, and that we shall have brought a different future for them. Thank you so much. Please share these conversations with your friends, comment questions you would like us to tackle, and till next time. Thank you.